If you're looking for something that's bite is worse than its bark, then you've come to the right place. It's time to reread Cujo. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Dave Musson, and this is the place where I talk to you about all things Stephen King. And in this video, I'm continuing my chronological reread of the entire bibliography of Stephen King. And we've reached 1981's Cujo, one of perhaps his most iconic works. Yes, the story of the rabid St. Bernard dog who kills a bunch of people and messes up the town of Castle Rock. Or not necessarily the town, but the psyche of the town. Yeah, that book. So I'm going to be rereading it in this video. Now, if you're curious to see what I thought of my other rereads so far, you can check out the full playlist up there and I'll link it down below as well. Started with Carrie to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Carrie, and I've just been ticking along since then. And in all of these rereads, I go through the same process. So what I'll eventually do is, when we get to the end, there'll be a lengthy analysis section where I'll offer some overall thoughts on the book. I will check off the book's score against my Stephen King bingo card that I created a couple of years ago. So that's 19 Stephen King cliches, trying to see how many of them we find in this book. I will give you 3 pros and 3 cons. So 3 things I really liked, 3 things I didn't like about this book. I'll pick out a list of stuff that I spotted for the first time in this reread. So that's 19s, character names, significant events, all of those kind of stuffs. Even some tenuous links, let's be honest. And I'll pick out some of my favourite quotes. And then I will round off by giving this book a score out of 5. And we're going to be scoring this one out of 5 rabid bats. But before that analysis section, you will get to join me in my little vlog of me actually reading the book, so sharing some thoughts on the fly, and a bunch of you seem to enjoy that, so that's fun. But before all of that, as a bit of an introduction, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Cujo, some background to Cujo the book. I'm going to tell you a bit about my relationship with the book, and with this book, it's quite a special one for me. And I'm going to show you my editions of Cujo and let you know which one I'm going to be using for this reread. Now, if you've read Cujo, let me know what you think of it in the comments. Are you a fan of this one? Do you think Cujo's a good boy? Are you kind of terrified of him? What's your favorite moment? All of that kind of stuff. Get involved in the comments. Let me know what you think of Cujo. So, that's kind of the housekeeping done. We're going to get into the background stuff before I pass you over to the vlog version of myself. But feel free to skip this using the timestamp below if you want to, but if you're happy to lend me a few more seconds, I've got a couple of things I really like to plug while I've got you ears and eyes looking at me and listening to me. Is that okay? So some quick plugs. I have a range of Stephen King themed band shirts that I designed that are mashing up Stephen King stuff and band logos, like this Children of the Corn in the Corn band logo t-shirt. Link to that is in the description. You'll also find a link to my award-winning collection of short stories, Once More Around the Sun, which I published in 2024. If you like Stephen King but want some like British versions, yeah, that's a collection for you. I also have a Stephen King trivia book, which came out in 2022 and covers every single book and adaptation up to 2022. Probably need to do a new version soon, but hey, you can get the original down below. And if you like what I'm doing on this channel, you can become a member, become a constant viewer, get early access to normal videos, get bonus videos just for you, and some special emojis as well. Again, link is down below. Okay, right, let's get back onto Cujo. So some background on Cujo then. First published on the 8th of September 1981. And ultimately a book that won the British Fantasy Award in 1982. As I said at the start, this is one of the contenders for being the most iconic Stephen King book. If we're thinking of Mount Rushmore of Stephen King villains, Cujo's definitely in the conversation. And it's that story about a St. Bernard who has got rabies and has got a wife and her young... No, she's not a wife. She's a wife, but first and foremost, she's a woman and her young son trapped in their car, which she's driven up there because the owner of the St. Bernard is a mechanic. Her car was stalling. She wanted to get it fixed. Too bad, Cujo had already killed the mechanic and her car died, and he trapped them in there. And it's this this claustrophobic survival horror piece, and mixed in with a load of kitchen sink drama as well, set in the town of Castle Rock. It's great, and I'm really looking forward to doing this reread. So a little bit about the background then. So the name Cujo is an interesting one, and it's actually one of the aliases of Willie Wolfe, who was one of the men responsible for the Patty Hearst kidnapping, which is definitely something that is influential on King. He was thinking about doing something inspired by that story when the idea for The Stand first came around. So that was something that definitely impacted on his brain. The idea for Cujo, though, taking the name aside, actually came from real life experience the King. So he had a dodgy Ford Pinto, and he took his car to a garage. And while he was there, a huge St. Bernard came out of the garage and lunged at him. And luckily the mechanic sort of got the dog away from him, and the dog didn't do King any harm. But that what if moment, that clearly stuck. And that's something that is big for King. He's great on seeing an image or seeing a moment and making a whole book out of it. And that didn't go away. And it gave him the idea for Cujo. As I said, this is set in Castle Rock. It's the first Castle Rock story we've had since The Dead Zone. If you've not read The Dead Zone and you're about to read Cujo, just be aware that there are some spoilers from one of the plot lines in The Dead Zone in Cujo. So there's a significant part of The Dead Zone set in Castle Rock, and that's a kind of procedural detective part of the story. And the resolution of that is spoiled in Cujo. So just be mindful of that if you're looking to dodge spoilers. But it's great to be back in Castle Rock. And even though the majority of this story takes place at the end of a road outside Castle Rock, it's still part of that town. We've still got the presence of what happened in the Dead Zone looming over the town. And it's a really important book to read for looking further ahead in King's bibliography, when again we return to Castle Rock and we get mentions of the good boy Cujo from this book. But that's kind of what you need to know about background. Scary dog, killing people. That's about it. So let's move on now to my relationship with this book. So as I mentioned, this is kind of a special one for me. And if you've been a fan of my channel for a while, you will already know what I'm going to say. But this was the first Stephen King book I ever read. And I think I've told this story before, but what the hell? I'll tell it again. So I, for whatever reason, just didn't read Stephen King until 2010. And my mum had always said I should read him, and in particular had said I should read Cujo, because I'd grown up with dogs. I'm an only child, but I grew up with 2 dogs, always been around dogs, and obviously dog turned bad. That's quite appealing in terms of the dark part of my brain. And one day I was in a charity shop, which I think you Americans call a Goodwill store or a thrift store. I'm never quite sure. Somewhere you take stuff you don't want anymore and donate it, and people can buy it, and the money goes to charity. And at that point, there were just Stephen King books everywhere, and I picked Cujo up just on a whim. I was looking for a book to read. I gave it a go, burned through it, and the rest is history. Like, within a couple of months, I'd scoured all of the local charity shops and got every Stephen King book that had been published up until that point, and that was it. I was obsessed. So this book has a lot to answer for in terms of my fandom. Basically, this channel, this video wouldn't exist if I hadn't read Cujo. So yeah, my relationship with this is quite a strong one. I've read it for a second time about 2 months after I became a father for the first time. And so I was reading it in July, which works for the setting of the book, but it was also not a good time. We had quite a difficult start to life as parents. And I remember reading this. Either one of my parents or one of my in-laws had bought my wife and I like what was supposed to be a less relaxing massage treatment. And it just wasn't, because our baby was not very well and it was just stressful. And I remember we were each having our treatment and the other was sitting in the waiting room with the baby. And I was sort of reading this book and trying to soothe my baby. And I don't really like massages anyway. It was just all, I don't like the summer either. So it was just all a bit of a stressful experience. So not the best reread experience. But yeah, I'm really excited to go back to this one, particularly, and that's probably should have mentioned this in the background section, but particularly having read You Like It Darker last year, and the story Rattlesnakes, which is sort of a sequel to Cujo. It's Vic Trenton from this book, picking up many, many years later. And that reminded me that I like those characters a lot. So I'm very excited to go back to this one. And again, with it being my first King, like I've got to see how it holds up. I think I ranked it quite highly in my overall ranking of Stephen King stuff. It may even be top 20. And I'm definitely curious to see where this one sits now. Because this book, famously, again, something else I should have put in the trivia section. I'm just terrible at this today. This book, famously, King doesn't remember writing. He wrote this at the height of his alcohol troubles, and he just doesn't really remember writing it. I mean, who here hasn't written a best-selling novel that is an icon of modern horror and just doesn't remember it? I mean, I know I've done it loads of times, but seriously, yeah, this is going to be interesting because if you see past the iconography of Cujo, like, is it the writings of a drunk, or is it just proof that King is genius, and even when he doesn't know what he's doing, he's still churning out incredible fiction? So I'm really excited to get into this, and yeah, I guess it's almost time to jump into the vlog. But before we do that, I've got to show you my editions of Cujo, haven't I? And let you know which one I'm going to be reading. So I have 2 copies of Cujo. I've got this beautiful first edition paperback with the original paperback cover on that I love. This is one of my favorite covers, and I love the font. I love everything about this. But I'm not going to read this because I want to keep this in decent condition. And you know what's coming, don't you, if you've been here before? I'm going to read my rainbow edition. I mean, Cujo does not look scary on the front of there at all. And yes, I stole my intro. His bite is worse than his bark. Much, much worse. I stole that from the really tacky line on the front of this. But I just like the rainbow editions. They're great to read, and they are my favorite editions of King. So I'm going to read that one. But this is the best cover for sure. And there we go. That's all the preamble done. So if you're excited, hey, let's do a YouTuber thing. If you're excited, hit that like button. Yeah, do that. I've never done that. I feel weird, kind of dirty to do that. But yeah, if you're excited, hit that like button and come with me as I vlog my way through reading this. And then I'll come back at the end with some more coherent thoughts, and we'll rattle through all these sections and see where Cujo ranks in my overall reread. So we're up and running with the Cujo reread. As I've already said, this was my first King read, so I'm excited to come back to this one. And the opening, I'd forgotten how good it is. It's just really scary. Like straight away, we get talking about Dodd, Frank Dodd from the Dead Zone. We learn that Frank Dodd's mum died not long after Frank Dodd did, but that kind of sets the atmosphere brilliantly for Castle Rock and the lingering fear that Dodd has left on that town. And then we're transported into Tad's bedroom and whatever might or might not be in his closet. And King is so good at writing little kids being scared at night. And he takes great care to make it seem like it is all just in Tad's imagination. And then there's just a line of something with amber eyes in Tad's closet holding watch on him. And then you're like, wait, what? So what, is that real? What's happening? So yeah, like in terms of opening 20 pages or so, really good atmosphere setting. We get Aunt Evie Chalmers as well. Talking about something hot and something foul and sort of predicting this bleak summer on the horizon. And of course we get introduced to Cujo early on as well. And we learn that he is a good boy right away. And we see a bit of his perspective as well, which is always fun. So lots of good stuff, and it doesn't waste too much time. Like Cujo gets bitten by the bats pretty early on. We find out about Donna's affair pretty early on as well, which leads me on to Steve Kemp, who is not a nice character. I mean, I remembered him for one particular incident that happens later in the book, but yeah, he's pretty nasty. And that line where he just turns around and said, what if I decide to just rape you? That's not good. Don't like that. And the fact that he sees masturbation as a sign of creativity. I mean, if he were around now, he'd probably use AI, wouldn't he? He'd probably use generative AI because that's about the same as masturbation being creativity. Um, but some interesting stuff here. You can tell. So this is the book that King famously wrote and doesn't remember writing because he was so drunk. And some of this does feel like drunk writing, like just just a really rambling backstory to Gary Purvier. But that feels drunk, and I don't know whether that's intentional to feel as drunk as the character or if it is just drunk writing, but it's just so rambling and like, okay, cool, we get it. And we get like 11 pages of the AdWorks backstory, which again, even for the king is a lot. So yeah, and then we get more AdWords minutiae later on as well. So I don't really need all of that. But I guess the sharp serial stuff is interesting. But again, we don't need the full company backstory of AdWorks. Like that's fine. We obviously get Bannerman mentioned, which is a joy, and then some really nice bits here. This book is full of foreshadowing and little throwaway lines that would become King's calling card in the 80s. But there's some really nice stuff here. Like the writing around Aunt Evie's death is is very, very strong. She just kind of pops out. Um, I thought that was effective. But at the end of this first section, where you've got Joe Magruder, and by the way, there's a band called Magruder Grind who are great, but Joe Magruder and Ronnie Dubé chatting, and they sort of say their farewells, and there's just this last line of this of page 100, which is where I've got to. Neither of them thought about Cujo again until they read about him in the paper. You're like, okay, something's gonna happen. So yeah, about a quarter of the way through. Um, some bits that are probably needed as tighter edit, but generally the atmosphere is being set here. We're introduced to a bunch of characters, and it's King doing what he does well. It's domestic kitchen sink drama with the looming presence of something supernatural. So, I don't know what happens, but let's see what happens, shall we? So another 100 another 100 pages of Cujo done. Basically halfway through now, just coming up to the bit where Donna and Tad have pulled up and their car isn't working and it's all about to go off. But we we get some great moments in this sort of second quarter of the book. Cujo makes his first attacks, and there's some great Cujo perspective here. So, like where Cujo is about to attack Gary Purvier. And we've had all the perspective of Gary saying, like, nice boy, nice boy. And there's just this paragraph. To Cujo, the words coming from the man meant nothing. They were meaningless sounds like the wind. What mattered was the smell coming from the man. It was hot, rank, and pungent. It was the smell of fear. It was maddening and unbearable. He suddenly understood the man had made him sick. He lunged forward, the growl in his chest mounting into a heavy roar of rage. Yeah, just some really nasty attacks and giving you an idea of what Cujo is going to be capable of when Donna and Tad turn up. Some also other things that I liked in this one, we just got like, bear with me, just trying to find my page. There's just, it's like, again, more Cujo stuff, little lights like this. Like just one line of, and then the growling began. Like so good. It is little lines like that that really get you in this book. But what I actually liked a lot in this section was sort of the writing about parenting. So when um when Donna's car starts playing up again and she shouts at it and Tad gets scared and he starts crying and she just goes, shut up. Oh Christ, just shut up, Tad. And it just feels really real parenting. But also there's this really nice line about Donna reflecting on her life as a woman, as a wife, and as a mother. And particularly this line here, mother, that's fine too. But there's a little less of it every year because every year the world gets another little slice of him, meaning Tad. And I just found that to be really powerful writing for a book that was written by somebody who was so drunk he didn't remember writing it. Like he was clearly switched on to being a parent and very like tuned into how he parented, how his wife parented, how his kids reacted and stuff. So really perceptive, even if he wasn't completely with it. But yeah, the next part of this is just where it's all going to go all out. Um, and it all just goes off. So yeah, the next vlog update might well just cover the rest of the book because I can see me just plowing through this second half of the book in no time at all. It's a fast read anyway, but then when we get to the point where they're at the Camber farm and Cujo has got them penned into the car and we're trying to see if Vic can get back, trying to see what Steve Kemp will do, all of those kind of things. Yeah, great. Steve Kemp's annoying, isn't he? Can't remember if I mentioned him in the last vlog, but yeah, he is not a nice character. Um, and it would be really good if Cujo got him instead of the Trentons. But hey, I know that doesn't happen, but still, wishful thinking. Anyway, on with the reread we go. So I thought this might happen. Those final 200 pages just absolutely flew through them. Once Cujo had the Trentons trapped, the pace of the book is just unreal. And but even when you're switching between characters and locations, you don't want to stop. And I think the fact that there's no chapters, obviously there are line breaks and stuff, but it just keeps you hooked in and keeps you reading. And I mean, so much good stuff in the second half of that book. We get the infamous Jizz attack from Steve Kemp, which is still as weird as it was the first time I read it. And you get Vic being away and realizing something isn't quite right and ended up coming home and then trying to work out where in the hell his wife and kid are. But obviously the main event is Cujo against Donna, really. I mean, obviously, spoilers, but Tad dies. But I almost feel like we don't get enough of Tad's character for us to be sad about him dying. We are sad we're devastated for Donna and for Vic as well. So it's much more that parental gut punch rather than what you might expect from a young kid dying, because frankly, he doesn't have enough voice in this book. So it's Donna against Cujo. And God, what a ridiculously just sweaty, horrible slog. Like, that dog should not survive that long. And Donna knows it, and yet he's there, tricking her, hiding in front of the car, waiting for her to come out, doing all of this stuff. He double bluffs her, like going after her in the day, and she's like convinced that he's going to be by the car, so she doesn't dare go to the house to try and use the phone. But there's like some of the passages are incredible, particularly when Cujo attacks. And when Donna first gets out of the car, and Cujo attacks, there's some great passages. This is a couple of bits. Starlight ran across Cujo's mad eyes in dull semicircles. His teeth were snapping only inches from her face, and she could smell a dead world on his breath. Terminal sickness, senseless murder. She thought crazily of the drain backing up just before her mother's party, spurting green goo all over the ceiling. Like, some great stuff there. And there's another line on the next page that I'm probably going to read in the final wrap up. But that whole sequence is like a 2-page sequence of Cujo trying to attack Donna, and it is just visceral and terrifying. And then, of course, at the end, when Tad's dead and Vic is there and Donna gets taken away in the ambulance, and there's just this really sad moment because Tad has taken the monster words with him that Vic has written to help keep him safe from the monsters in his room, and Vic finds them. And there's just this really sad moment where he reads them and realizes that they didn't work in the end. And he just throws the words at Cujo's dead body. And that just hit me as being really, really sad. And then, of course, we get the sort of wrap-up stuff at the end. And I really like that King does round off the story by reminding everyone that Cujo was a good boy. But then there's this really weird line where he just says, as far as I know. And the narrative has not been in first person at all, the entire book. And he just throws that line in there. And it's just like, wait, what? And then the book ends. And it's all a bit strange. But yeah, honestly, that last few bits get some first mentions, I think, some bingo card stuff, some first mentions of tendons creaking in the neck and nails digging into the palms, which feel like they're in every King book. But I also reckon these might be the first time I spotted them here. So that was fun. But yeah, loads of stuff I'm going to mention in the things I noticed for the first time section. But honestly, like a book that like it's interesting because it builds atmosphere brilliantly in that first quarter. The second quarter perhaps is a little slow, but then the second half is just unreal in terms of speed. Just such a powerful read, terrifying, heartbreaking, all of those things. Horribly sweaty as well. Like you feel that heat, and yeah, a romp. So give me a few seconds. I'll compose some thoughts, and then we'll wrap this up, shall we? So we've made it to the end of Cujo, and it's time for the big analysis piece of this reread video. So what I'm going to offer in the remaining part of this video, I'm going to go through how Cujo scores against my Stephen King bingo card. I'm going to give you 3 pros and 3 cons, so 3 things I really liked, 3 things I didn't like. I'm going to go through some stuff that I noticed for the first time on this reread. I'm going to pick out some of my favourite quotes. And I'm going to give this book a score out of 5 rabid bats. And we'll have a look where that ranks against the other stuff that I've already gone through in my chronological reread. And then we'll wrap things up. But before we get to that, I'm going to offer some overall thoughts having got to the end of this brutal book. So as I mentioned in this video already, this was my first Stephen King book that I ever read. It holds a special place in my heart, and it still holds up even on what was my 3rd read of this story. I think what I'd never really appreciated before was the lack of chapters and how that hooks you in, especially the final 100 pages or so where we're jumping from character to character and we are scrabbling around and desperate for a happy ending. It just keeps you moving, and there's no real point where you can stop, and you don't want to put the book down. And that, coupled with the action on page, you just burn through it. So this is infamously the book that King doesn't remember writing because he was so drunk at the time. And actually, reading it through the lens of a drunk person having writing it makes it pretty interesting, because there are parts of this book, I think I said in the intro, I wanted to work out whether King was still a genius even when he didn't know what he was doing, or whether it read like a drunk writing it. And for the majority of this book, it just feels like King being King, cranking out an incredible story. But there are parts of this that do feel like the ramblings of the drunk. We get 11 pages of backstory about AdWorks and the Sharp Cereals account, which does feel like somebody who's just talking too much and isn't letting anybody else get a word in. Also, the backstory for Gary Purvier feels really rambling and drunk. So there's those elements that are just like, okay, Steve, just stop talking now, stop writing now. But there's also quite a few lines from different characters, like little lines, little observations that are quite nasty. And it got me wondering whether, like, late 70s, early 80s King was potentially a bit of a mean drunk. And I'm obviously thrilled that he has battled through his addictions and put them behind him. But it's kind of interesting because you get so much in this book of an idea of what sort of a parent King was like. Very attentive, very caring, very loving, very worried that things were going to happen to his kids. That comes across so strongly in this book. But like I say, you also get hints of like, I wonder if a couple of beers in, he was a bit quick to say something mean and say something cruel, because some of these characters have some somewhat surprisingly mean thoughts. And given that it was written by a drunk, yeah, that kind of makes sense. So the terror in this book does come in fits and starts, because it is a story, a supernatural horror story mixed in with like kitchen sink drama. But when the scares come and they are cranked, God, do they hit hard. We had this rabid Cujo who, as we see through his points of view parts, he's just trying to kill everything that he thinks are sources of his pain. He's even trying to kill water at one point. And it's done in a way that is terrifying, not just because of the size of the dog and the destructive capability of him, but despite his illness, he is still able to be cunning and plot and really scheme against the things that he wants to damage. It shouldn't happen. I said in the vlog, like, he shouldn't have that mental capability by that point in his disease, and yet he is. That's where the supernatural comes in and makes it even more scary. And he's just relentless. And of course, that gives us the claustrophobia, the survival horror around Donna and Tad in their clapped out Pinto. And you just feel everything in those moments, whether it's hearing Cujo, feeling his breath against the window, just sensing the utter hopelessness of the situation, and even having the glaring sun burn through the windshield and onto your skin and exhaust you. Like, it's all there, and it's all so powerful. Now, when I read this for the first time, the two things that stuck with me the most were Steve Kemp's vandalism, Jizz aided, and of course the ending. And both of them hit me again this time, but for different reasons. The Steve Kemp vandalism stuff, that's just gross for the sake of revulsion, and it kind of underlines 3 times what a horrible character Steve Kemp is. The ending, though, so bleak, so dour, such a gut punch of an ending. And it's definitely an ending. I mean, Kingo himself has said that he probably wouldn't have written that ending if he were writing it again. And he approved of the movie's ending where Tad survived. And it's definitely not something, I don't think he would have even written that ending if he'd have written Cujo at the end of the 80s. But coming where it did, this sort of mean drunk writing this, like, you can't deny that it's effective as an ending. And this story, as I said, you're hoping all the way through, you're racing towards what you hope is a happy ending, and it just doesn't come. And it's such a bold move. Like, we perhaps take it for granted now that horror stories don't always end well. But here, so powerful. And again, remember, I read this was my first Stephen King read. So this set me up thinking, like, okay, this guy does not pull any punches. This guy doesn't hold back. I am in to see what else he has written. But of course, what we have to remember most of all is that Cujo was a good boy, and none of this was his fault. It all just got totally out of hand. So those are some overall thoughts. Let's jump into these different sections, shall we? So we can start wrapping up this reread. So the Stephen King bingo card first then. So you remember, this is a thing I created a couple of years ago. 19 different Stephen King cliches and tropes that crop up time and time again in his work. We're trying to see which Stephen King book has the most of them. And exciting breaking news for you. Cujo scores a particularly impressive 12.5 out of 19, which puts it right at the top so far. So we have, obviously, the main setting, yes. We have a small town with dark secrets, yes. We have a mention of full dark. We have 19s. I think the storm or something. We have 19s in there. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but we definitely have 19s. I've given half a mark for amazing sex for the woman, because Donna does mention about when she's having her affair with Steve Kemp that she does come during those sessions, so she's obviously getting something from it. We get half a mark for the so-and-so laughed until they coughed or farted thing, and that is when Donna and Vic are laughing so much when Vic has had a glass of iced tea when he's looking at her car, and he leaves the iced tea inside the bonnet of her car and then shuts it down, and they get to laughing. We get loads of that was the last time they saw so-and-so alive, or the last time they thought of, or the last time such and such. Loads of that in this book. We get a mention of fingernails digging into the palms, which, as I said earlier, I think is the first time we get this crop up. We get a blue chambray shirt. Steve Kemp wears one, of course. We get a mention of tendons creaking in the neck. We get references to nubbins and boobs and comments on women's appearances. Of course we do. We get lots of brand names mentioned. Half a point for the writer, because Steve Kemp is a poet, but he's not a full-time poet. He's also an adulterer, a tennis pro, and someone who strips down furniture. And of course, we get a point for the dead dog. because of what happens to poor Cujo at the end. So 12.5 out of 19. So on to pros and cons then from Cujo. Things I liked and things I didn't like. Let's start with the 3 cons, the things I didn't like. I didn't like Steve Kemp. Despite one of the things I'm going to mention in my pros, the character of Steve Kemp, I just didn't like that line where he just turned around and said, what if I raped you? Just didn't need that at all. So no good. I also didn't like the AdWorks stuff. Like, fine, give us a bit about why Vic is away, but I don't need that much information. And it was just a bit too dull. And nobody cares about people who make ads anyway, do they? And the third thing I didn't like, it was a stretch. There wasn't much I didn't like here, but I just didn't like that random first person mention at the end where it's like, as far as I know. We have the whole book with no first person narrative. It just seemed really weird and a really odd way to end the book. So those are my 3 cons. What did you not like about Cujo? Do let me know in the comments. So when it comes to things I did like about Cujo, one of the things I did, even though I didn't like Steve Kemp, the jizz attack scene is just hilarious. It's embedded on my brain. I shouldn't like it. It's gross. And yeah, I did just find it really funny and really weird. So that goes on here. I also really liked the sections where we were reading it from the point of view of Cujo. Just so good. Like where he's referring to like the boy and the man and the woman and the pain and all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, I'm all in for that. And my third pro was the whole idea of the monster words and trying to banish the sort of the willies and the ghoulies of what's in the closet. I really liked that as some piece of active parenting that Vic tried to do and that worked to some extent. But then when you couple it with how he finds the monster words at the end, and Tad is dead and Donna is basically insane, and all he can do is just throw that paper with the monster words at the body of Cujo while his heart is breaking. Like, so powerful, because you feel like with those monster words, he's done something positive and he's made a difference and he's helped Tad overcome that. And then he realizes it's just a perfect symbol of how helpless Vic was in the entire situation because he wasn't there. And even his presence in the form of the words couldn't do anything. I thought that was such a clever device. Probably wasn't intentional at all because King was so drunk when he wrote this, but it just works brilliantly. So those are my 3 things I particularly liked. Let me know your favourite things about Cujo. Okay then, let's run through some things I noticed for the first time. So this is where I'm picking out 19s, character names, significant events, sort of tenuous links to other Stephen King stuff, and there's quite a few here. So we obviously get mentions of Frank Dodd throughout the book right at the start. We learn that Frank Dodd's mum died soon after the events of the Dead Zone. There's a reference to the boogeyman when we're talking about what's in the closet. We get a reference of the Mellow Tiger, which is the bar in Castle Rock. We also get Evie Chalmers on TV, who is Polly Chalmers from Needful Things relative. We get mention of how one character starts off having a single week drink in an evening, and that slowly becomes 2 or 3, which is something that Mary in Roadwork also went through. We get reference to a game of Hearts, which made me think of Hearts in Atlantis. We get reference to some heat lightning, which made me think of all the lightning storms and stuff from a Buick 8 that would come many, many years later. The relationship between Charity Camber and Joe Camber, to me, felt a lot like the relationship between Dolores Claiborne and Joe St. George. Not nice. We get Donna remembering a boyfriend from high school who died in a car crash when they were 19. We get Vic feeling like he was a participant at a masquerade ball, which made me think of The Shining. We get one character, I think it was Donna, saying that they're going to let you go on this jaunt, which obviously made me think of The Jaunt. We get a reference of there maybe being deadfalls hidden beneath the surface, and deadfalls, of course, will come up again in Pet Sematary. We get reference to there being a crow off there somewhere in the field, which made me think of Randall Flagg, of course. And if you want more Randall Flagg, check out my guide to Randall Flagg. We get one character is a veteran from Vietnam who lost his leg in the Tet offensive, and Tet is a name that comes up time and time again in the Dark Tower stuff. We get reference to Nightfall feeling talismanic, which of course made me think of the talisman, unfortunately. We get reference to the Trentons having hiked on the Appalachian Trail, which I'm pretty sure is where The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is set. There was one page that had a bunch of stuff. So we get a reference to Kellogg's Product 19. We get a reference to some excessive farting, which is very Stephen King. And we get a mention of The Golden Years, which is a series that King would go on to write in the early 90s. Later on, we discover that Sheriff Bannerman's police car is a Fury, a Plymouth Fury, which is the same type of car as Christine. One random thing, Tad's full name is Theodore. I had never clocked that before. And I would never have thought Tad would be short for Theodore, but there you go. We get George Bannerman tripping over his own intestines, which is an image that we'll get again on the next book I'm going to read, The Running Man. We get Tad, a reference to the fact that he has a yellow rain slicker at home, which of course made me think of Georgie from It. And I think that is everything I spotted from the first time. But what other things linked to King stuff did you spot in Cujo that I might have missed? Do let me know. So some of my favourite quotes I wanted to read for you. I think I might have mentioned this one already, but I'm going to read a bit more. So this is when Brett has gone out in the morning in the fog and Cujo appears. Just a great couple of lines we get. And then the growling began. His heart leaped into his throat and he fell back a step, all his muscles tensing into bundles of wire. His first panicky thought, like a child who was suddenly tumbled into a fairy tale there, another one I missed, was wolf. And he looked around wildly. There was no to see but white. Cujo came out of the fog. So good. So good. Something else I wanted to pick out was the writing around Aunt Evie's death. Let me just find the bit I am looking for. Yeah, there we go. So Aunt Evie Chalmers lived close by, and Tad shouted shouts of terrified glee were the last sound she heard as she died. Her heart gave out, one of its paper-thin walls breaching suddenly and almost painlessly as she sat in her kitchen chair, a cup of coffee by one hand and a straight-eight Herbert Treherton by the other. She leaned back, and her vision darkened, and somewhere she heard a child crying, and for a moment it seemed that the cries were joyful, but as she went out, suddenly propelled as if by a hard but not unkind push from behind, it seemed to her that the child was screaming in fear, in agony. Then she was gone, and her niece Abby would find her the following day, her coffee as cold as she was, her cigarette a perfect and delicate tube of ash, her lower plate protruding from her wrinkled mouth like a slot filled with teeth. Just really good writing. But my favourite, I read some of this in the vlog. This is when Cujo is attacking. But this paragraph, or this couple of paragraphs is great. So this is where Cujo has got his head in the car and he's going for Donna. So its snapping jaws were inches from the bare flesh of her midriff. She held it off as best she could, only faintly aware of her son's screams behind her. Cujo's eyes were locked on her. Incredibly, his tail was wagging. His back legs worked at the gravel, trying to get a footing solid enough to allow him to jump right in, but the gravel kept splurting out from under his driving rear paws. He lunged forward, her hands slipped, and suddenly he was biting her bare stomach just below the white cotton cups of her bra, digging for her entrails. Oh, I mean, that's pretty scary, right? Yeah, pretty good. So, to wrap this up then, what are we giving this out of 5 rabid bats? This book that King doesn't even remember writing and yet is an icon of horror. And like I said earlier, I mean, who hasn't written one of those in just a complete blackout stupor, right? So, rabid bats out of 5. I'm giving this 3.75 rabid bats out of 5. So that's the same that I gave for The Long Walk, and it puts it just below Night Shift and just above Roadwork. At the moment, I can't decide whether The Long Walk is going to be above Cujo in the ranking. At the moment, they are very much tied for entirely different reasons. I've really enjoyed going back to what was my first Stephen King book. I perhaps haven't liked it quite as much as the first time. I think I probably had it as a 4 out of 5 before. And my Goodreads rating will be 4 out of 5. But that's because Goodreads are cowards and don't do half or quarter stars. But yeah, it's probably dropped a little bit in my estimation from the first read, but still an incredibly powerful read and a really enjoyable one. And certainly top of the list for the 80s so far, although we are only in 1981, so friends, there is a long way to go. But yeah, there we go, 3.75 out of 5. Let me know how many rabid bats out of 5 you would give Cujo. And, well, thanks for coming with me this far on this reread. We're done with the reread, which means, of course, the next time we're going to come back right here. We're going to go over to Goodreads and we're going to read some of the 1-star reviews of Cujo to see what the people who didn't like it so much thought of it. So do join me for that. Check out the rest of the reread series. Subscribe to this channel, all of those kind of things. Check out the links in the description. Watch out for dogs. And yeah, thanks again for your support. And I will see you soon. You're all good boys and girls. And anything else that doesn't fit that particular binary. You're all good. Good. Yes.